Welcome back. We're going to talk in this lecture about the Industrial Revolution that really gained traction and expanded rapidly from about the year 1750 forward, even to our modern day, really. So, in this lecture, we'll be exploring the origins of this revolution, the mechanization, really, of sectors of the economy and industry, the conditions that made Britain, in particular, the epicenter for industrial development, who some of these early industrialists were, the technology that was developed and its early kind of implementation, and also talk a bit about the early consequences, mostly focusing on kind of the impact that industrialization has on the labor sector. We'll also be understanding the kind of economics of industrialization, providing some figures as far as the the skyrocketing growth of productivity and how this is going to essentially, kind of lead to greater not only individual wealth in some cases, but also lead to national wealth as well. And this feeds into the Industrial Revolution as an ingredient in the ever kind of volatile mix of imperial competition between states. This is going to happen most immediately in Europe, but as we kind of get these ripple effects of industrialization spreading around the world, we're going to see in future lectures really how the United States in particular is going to maximize its industrializing effects, but also those populations that are on the receiving end of the Industrial Revolution. That is to say, the those that are at the mercy of industrialization rather than being able to take advantage of it in their for themselves and in their own right. So this lecture again is really kind of focused to just give an overview of what the Industrial Revolution was about, focusing heavily on Britain and how it begins to, in essence, in the early decades, outpace many of its rivals, and soon after, these rivals are going to realize that industrialization is something that is not going to be they can't do without, essentially. So, as far as the origins of industrialization are concerned and the Industrial Revolution, we need to understand that there were sustained signs of industrial growth that began around the year 1750. Basically, it was the environment, that is to say, that the alignment of various factors in Britain allowed it to really maximize its potential for putting the Industrial Revolution to full effect. One of these was the recent agricultural revolution that was taking place, that there were refinements within the field of agriculture allowing for more food to be produced at a cheaper cost with less labor. So this is going to help the British population initially, and also the global population overall, reap benefits as far as what industrialization had to offer. This is going to lead to a rapid growth in population. I will try and see if I can find world population graph that reflects the unmistakable signs where the world's population takes off right as the Industrial Revolution kicks in, and that's not by coincidence. I mean that essentially what you have is people not needing to be so closely tied physically to the land in order to support themselves. And so, because the agricultural industry itself is able to, kind of provide greater, uh, resources with less work and less hands. This means that there's an abundance of labor that can be allocated elsewhere, and so industry has a ready pool of labor at its disposal to right when it needs it, and that's important to understand. Britain was also a politically stable country. It was perhaps one of the most stable countries in the world in the mid to late 18th century. Earlier revolutions in the 17th century, the Revolution of 1688, the Glorious Revolution, opened or allowed for one, the kind of tensions, the religious tensions that have been festering within England between Protestant and Catholic factions to really once and for all be resolved. And so that kind of you know struggle and volatility between these two religious communities was really on the back burner from 1688 onward. This allowed for a refocusing of attention to take advantage of the rapid changes and developments that were beginning to take place in the industrial sector. This is a key characteristic, you might say, of the mindset of constitutional monarchies versus absolutist monarchies. That you might have changes in leadership, changes in regime. With I mean, England is still a monarchy, and so monarchical power is going to change. It may even change between various dynasties, but there is a consistency within the functions of government, where the day-to-day operation of governing is somewhat removed. There are more layers of bureaucracy. There are more buffers, you might say, that make it so that any severe changes in heads of government would not necessarily heavily affect the day-to-day lives of British citizens. Whereas in absolutist monarchies, if you might have these rather wild swings, and we've noted several of them to date, where you might have a particularly good span of good leadership that is replaced by someone who is inept or corrupt or abusive, and so as a result, that potential under an absolutist kind of form of government, it would now has an additional kind of consequence or knock-on effect when you begin to factor in this new potential for industrial growth and basically the exponential growth of wealth as a result of it. Britain also, speaking of wealth, had an advanced banking system that allowed it to have the capital on hand for investment in industry. They had the money that they could use to fund new technologies, the new industries that were coming online, new ventures, the construction of new facilities like factories, and so that kind of ability to use not only money but also credit and the extension of loans to help fund and actually get the in a kind of ironic twist, the engine of industry up and running was necessary, and Britain had that. It also helped that Britain, because of its effective government, had a ready means of you know good administration and accounting, so that it had public funds through taxation that were coming into the coffers of government that could be used to help with a number of factors that would help be accentuate the advantages of industrialization. And we'll see more examples of that in just a few moments here. Britain also possessed the necessary natural resources that they could take advantage of immediately. This was literally necessary for the fueling of the industrial age. This includes coal deposits throughout the English countryside, um, high quality and quantity of concentration of those deposits, and also iron ore needed to construct the kind of metals that were necessary to build the physical machinery and what have you. Britain had a good system of infrastructure that it had developed and maintained and continued to expand. These included not only natural avenues of infrastructure, for example, waterways and rivers that went from basically the interior of the country to um, the various shorelines of the island, but also the construction of canals to make for the more efficient movement of goods when and where they were needed between these growing urban centers that were serving as hubs for industrial production. Britain also had a good uh, network of roads and bridges that it was able to um, expand, or actually construct, sustain, and expand. And this was all further kind of advanced by the fact that there were no internal tariffs or tolls on the movement of goods. So this meant that there weren't this didn't um, inhibit the movement of goods from one part of the country to the other, so that you could get the raw coal or iron ore from its source to its manufacturing site in these factory cities without any type of fee necessarily, other than the transportation cost itself. And again, that's emblematic of good governance. I mean, people don't have to necessarily levy the taxes to raise local funds that are necessary, because there's enough being provided for from the organs of government as they exist. The British government was also receptive to the idea of private enterprise and the entrepreneurial spirit that was inherent within it. Um, the the ability to construct the infrastructure, the willingness to put forward or create a banking system, a robust system of finance, um, and the Bank of England itself as a kind of a model, allowed for money to go into funding projects, not only infrastructure but also to the banking industry to allow funds to be available for investing industrialization projects. Um, there was also a good relationship between the private sector and the public sector within England itself. That is essential to, again, this kind of industrial endeavor. Another key factor was that Britain was, by the mid to late 18th century, the 1700s, a global empire, and it was increasingly becoming a global empire, even with the loss of the United States in the American Revolution. it had managed to consolidate control in places like India, and by the end of the 18th century, in places like Egypt. Um, it was expanding its influence in uh, in the 18th, but also well into the 19th century in places like China, so that it could, and it retained even some colonies in the Caribbean and also in Canada as well. It was a protectorate of Britain, to continue to have these markets available for the goods that were being produced in this new industrial kind of template. Machine produced goods provided relatively cheap products that these markets, these developing areas, needed or wanted. These were again often non-luxury items, and there was a overall focus placed on providing these mass-produced functional products offered at a lower cost. So essentially, what you're doing is you are taking and creating manufactured goods that the areas of the world that were more either agricultural or were under imperial control, where you could uh, develop the economy in these areas to your liking, essentially, to kind of create the economy you needed there in order to maximize profits. Well, now you have the ability to produce the manufactured goods that are going to help create and drive that economy in these outlying areas under British control all around the world, enriching Britain itself even more in that regard. When we talk about the numbers, essentially from 1660 to 1760, in that 1 century, Britain, uh, e- British exports quadrupled during that period of time. This eclipsed both the French Empire and the Dutch Republic, and it allowed really Britain to reign supreme as a global power. It led also to a higher standard of living among Britons, which became the highest standard of living in Europe during that period of time. There was also an increased demand for goods caused by businesses and their leadership, and their necessity being placed on innovation, uh, which is again made manifest by the Industrial Revolution itself. What industries were affected initially and most heavily? Well, in the case of Britain, it really first began in the textile industry. This was the first industry really to retool and industrialize. What you had before the Industrial Revolution was uh, a cottage industry, kind of a very uh, uh, decentralized, localized, small scale um, model of production. And this is we're now beginning to experience a shift from this cottage industry and the techniques therein to the creation of more modern, centralized production models as seen in the factory system itself. The cottage industry was one where a um, business owner might contract out work to local households in order to produce a set quantity of produced good. So the business owner in the textile industry may say, okay, well, these households, here is the wool. I want you to focus on turning X pounds of wool into Y pounds of yarn. I will be back in 2 weeks to come retrieve that product and pay you upon receipt. And then he or she would take that product, the yarn, and then move it over to other households that might be focused solely on uh, knitting, creating textiles from that yarn. In some cases, it may be done all under the same roof, going from raw product to manufactured good, but you get the idea that this is very disjointed. It's kind of, again, tied to the individual residents, essentially. It is also interesting to note that it is the business owner that is the one doing the traveling and the commuting, you might say, between the contractors um, at the business owner's disposal. Under the factory system, that is flipped. So now you have the employees, those that are actually going to do the work, of taking a raw material, turning it into a manufactured product. They're the ones now traveling to a localized warehouse-like facility, a factory, where these goods are being produced. So there's a new kind of approach to what work means. There's a new approach to the relationship between, home, domestic life, and professional life or work. Um, so our modern notions of work-life balance, they're born here during this period of time. There are also this is going to be made possible, this transition from cottage industry to kind of a factory type of organization, or work model, is really due to the inventions that helped accelerate the pace of production. It also encourages the massing of resources, so that, because you're talking about mechanization, it means that these machines can usually turn out much more product at a faster rate than the traditional kind of cottage industry model. How do you do that? Well, you're going to need a centralized location in order to make that happen and be most efficient. Technologies in the textile industry include the following. First and foremost, the flying shuttle. This allowed for the doubling of the production of weavers' output using hand-operated looms, and it created this, kind of almost a glut of yarn, and that's only going to increase as we continue with the kind of development of and implementation of technology in various industries. Again, sticking with the textile industry, you have the spinning jenny, which was perfected by 1768 by James Hargreaves or Hargreaves. This is going to, again, keep up with the demand of taking the yarn and beginning to transform it into a manufactured final product. Later refinements by other entrepreneurs are going to increase yarn production even more. And so you have this kind of escalating type of effect, almost in reflecting the kind of mentality of the Enlightenment, as we looked at earlier, where those kinds of principles are being applied to mechanics and engineering. Well, here's a machine that does something, but how can we make it better? How can we make it even more efficient? How can we continue to, push the envelope, and again, maximize, the time, minimize the amount of energy, and with that combination, maximize profit. This is also going to lead to automation, as you might expect within industry, which is going to have serious consequences on employment, um, so that you have people now needing to understand not so much the uh, not necessarily having the skills to in a hands-on sense of textile production, but now requiring a more mechanical approach, that you need to understand um, how to work the machines, how to, in some cases, repair the machines that are now doing the work that was done traditionally by human beings. In order to have the raw materials necessary to produce the yarn that was necessary to feed these machines that were turning out final products, you needed to increase the amount of raw material itself. And this is where we get into providing a ready supply of cotton. Cotton was going to become increasingly uh, the thread, the raw material that was going to be used in the textile industry. In order to get that, you're going to need to expand the capacity of plantations and the plantation system in order to feed the literally feed the factories with the material needed. This was the case in the United States as well as elsewhere around the world. So major centers of cotton production not only included the American South, but also places like India and Egypt as well. In particular, they produced one of the world's finest varieties of cotton. What does this all mean? Well, in the case of the American South, it means that it's going to need slave labor in order to make sure that the cotton is grown, harvested, uh, and moved to the ports in order to get it to England in order to be turned into thread. In the United States, early in the Republic, the United States was not an industrial state. It was not an industrial powerhouse really whatsoever. It was largely agrarian well into the early decades of the 19th century. Really, it wasn't until about the 1820s through the 1840s when you see a modicum of industrial kind of expansion or establishment beginning to take hold in the United States itself. And so basically the United States in the late 18th and early 19th century is really serving as a source again still for raw material. By 1787, you have the introduction of the power loom by Edmund Cartwright. This allowed the weaving industry itself, to catch up to yarn production, so that there wasn't where there might be a glut of cotton turned into yarn that was just sitting around waiting for it to be kind of mass produced. Now with the power loom, that was not so much an issue. In 1793, Eli Whitney is going to invent the cotton gin. This is basically a necessity as far as cleaning cotton. So when you take raw cotton from the fields, oftentimes when you're removing it from the plant, there are seeds that get embedded in the fiber itself, and that is quite difficult and labor intensive to remove the individual seeds. In doing that, you are what's called cleaning the cotton, so that you have the raw fiber itself that's going to be used in the production of yarn. Well, Eli Whitney's, and this used to be done by hand. Okay? Eli Whitney's machine is now going to allow for that process to take place with the use of really a rudimentary machine that's going to again undergo several variations and refinements. And so, where slaves were required to clean the cotton by hand, with the introduction of this cotton gin, the one slave could now clean much more cotton much more quickly. How much so? Well, it was estimated that one slave could clean uh, about 1 pound of cotton per day. With the introduction of the cotton gin, that one slave could now clean about 50 pounds of cotton per day. Um, so that's the kind of scale of economy that we're talking about here. And that's felt across industries that underwent industrialization. Um, with regard, keeping with this textile example, by 1760, Britain was importing some 2.5 million pounds of raw cotton that was processed mainly via the cottage industry. By 1787, after the Industrial Revolution's kind of really beginning to kick in, and the mechanization is beginning to take place, Britain was importing about 22 million pounds of cotton, um, and most of this again was being spun on machines. By 1840, Britain was importing 366 million pounds of cotton. So that's the kind of numbers that we're talking about when we begin to talk about economies of scale, when we begin to talk about just how um, effective, how the scale of consequences basically that were beginning to be felt all around the world as far as industrialization that was taking place primarily in Britain, in one place in the world. And so you can see just by this one location that it has this kind of effect as the world begins to industrialize, as industrialization begins to branch out into other areas. Then this is these types of numbers are only going to become that much greater. In the iron ore industry, you have improvements in the refinement and the processing of the ore itself. When exposed to higher temperatures, this helps to burn away impurities, which created, again, stronger, higher quality products. It's going to lead also to a higher demand for iron itself. In 1740, Britain produced about 17,000 tons of iron. Again, that's basically about a decade before the Industrial Revolution really kind of begins to kick in. By the 1780s, Britain was producing 70 tons of 70,000 tons of iron per year. By the 1840s, that's up to 2 million tons, and by 1852, just 12 years later, it's up to nearly 3 million tons. And that was more than the rest of the world produced in iron as a whole. So Britain, all by itself, was producing more than the rest of the world by the mid 1850s. Other inventions included the introduction of steam technology, largely due to the contributions of James Watt, who was a Scottish engineer, making refinements to existing machinery again that yielded or became the first steam pump. This was the pump was necessary because even prior to the Industrial Revolution, one of the most important industries within Britain was mining. The problem was that the mines often flooded with water as a result of high water tables or rainwater, beginning to seep into mines and flood them. And so there was a constant need to have pumps on hand that could pump the water out faster than it was coming in order for miners to do the work that they needed to do. So oftentimes these were hand operated pumps, but once James Watt begins to introduce and supplied the mining industry with steam powered pumps, this meant that they were mechanized. They could pump water out much more quickly, more efficiently, and much more you know in a more reliable way. Essentially, it's just more overall better. You could now reallocate mining manpower to focus on extracting minerals, and also that it did a much better job of keeping the mines dry. The between 1850 and excuse me between 1815 and 1850, as a result of something like the steam powered pump, um, coal production in Britain quadrupled. In 1872, in 1782, Watt invented a steam engine. He is going to, in which you use steam to drive machinery, kind of a piston that's going to, drive a cog and wheel and, kind of lead to, well, eventually locomotion. Steam engines were effective in that they were, again, tireless. You basically kept them producing the steam necessary through the means of adding, in most cases, coal, burning it to boil the water to create the steam to drive the engine. Um, this began very quickly to eclipse the use of horses, and the use of horses over hauling material long distances. And again, this is fueled by coal, by a fossil fuel, which Britain again had an abundance of. By the year 1800, what is that? Just about 20 years after Watt begins to introduce and bring his steam engine concept online, engines were generating about 10,000 horsepower. By mid 19th century, that's 1850, engines could generate some 500,000 horsepower, and some locomotives it went as high as 790,000 horsepower. So these are tremendously powerful engines that are being considered and scaling up the ability basically to haul large quantities of goods to where they needed to be. And this is all done again to feed the necessity of the industrialized economy, the industrialized factory system. Again, this is going to have tremendous consequences for transportation and the need for quality infrastructure. Getting goods to market became paramount, and it became paramount because it now became more and more an issue of competition. Companies and businesses would often band together, in many cases, to fund road construction. When they did, they would, basically buy up the land that they wanted in which to install a road or a canal or some sort of infrastructure, because that's a private investment that's taking place. They could make these roads toll roads, which gives us the introduction of things like turnpikes. Canals, as I just mentioned, were built to maximize Britain's many rivers, railroads also obviously began to spring up and tie uh, locations of the country more closely to one another. This was essentially locomotion. Railroads were the preferred mode of travel throughout the Industrial Revolution. It was indispensable to industrial growth and economic development. These were steam powered, of course, locomotives. In 1804, a man by the name of Richard Trevithick constructed the first such railroad in Wales, in South Wales. This railroad had the capability to haul some 10 tons of ore and up to 70 people at about 5 miles an hour. So we aren't talking about modern railroads by any means, but nonetheless, you're talking about a tireless engine that is able to, again, move tons of material, not speedily, but it was constant and consistent. By 1830, you have the opening in Britain of the first public railroad system. This was attributed to George Stephenson. He used his engine, his railroad locomotive named the Rocket, to transport people and goods between Liverpool and Manchester, and this was at a whopping 16 miles an hour. By 1840, Britain had almost 2,000 miles of railroad track crisscrossing the country. By 1850, just 10 years later, Britain had almost 6,000 miles of track, so it had trebled in about a decade. Railroads were the quintessential expression of the growth and maturity that was taking place and the complexity that was taking place in and throughout the Industrial Revolution. Britain became home to advanced civil and mechanical engineering projects, as well as home to professionals that were, in that particular field. You have here, this includes things like the building, the construction of railroads, railroad bridges, tunnels. This gave an increased ability for humanity to gain mastery over nature and obstacles as really never before. It was provided for a new expressions to a sense of destiny, a sense of power, empowerment, and optimism. Railroads also created new opportunities for labor and investment, and not only in the industry of railroads, the conductors, the stewards, the mechanics, the people laying and maintaining the track, but it also basically bled into all the other economic activities that were in some way, shape, or form associated with the railroad industry. So, the transportation of people would lead to the need for hospitality industry, the movement of any type of good or equipment on via rails was now something that meant that those opened up new opportunities, new aspects for this labor, employment, and investment as far as they were concerned. Let me pause here and so we can get this first part done. And when I come back, I'll talk about the how these workers began to adjust to this new normal, this kind of new reality of industrialization, and talk about where industrialization began to move forward and kind of grow beyond Britain itself.